I'm at the Antique Wireless Museum in North Bloomfield, New York. Go in and see what there is. Let's take a look at inside the telegraph office.
The telegraph office. This represents a typical small-town 1920s telegraph office. Those two have actual Western Union red front, uppercase only typewriters. If you ever got a telegram, you know they were all uppercase. So there was no need for lowercase, so why have to hold the shift key down? In fact, if you hold the shift key down and hit the letter on either of those typewriters, you'll get a tilde under all the letters. This desk, as you can hear, is actually operating. It's set up as a 4-wire desk. There are 4 wires coming to the desk. 2 of them are operational. The other 2 are at the moment connected to nothing. We're looking at eventually putting them to other locations within the museum. But the 2 that are running are actually connected to the internet. We have an internet telegraph system. On Saturday afternoons when I'm here, between about 2 and 3, I'll be chatting with people all over the world using it. And each of the wires is coming to one of these what are called calling sounders. They're mainline sounders. They're right in the main telegraph line, and they're called calling sounders because every telegraph office had an office call that was unique, at least in that region. We call this one DW for Davis Wolf. Canandaigua, for instance, was CA. For some reason, Holcomb right over here was EF. Okay. Now, if I want to work a wire, I take a cordless plug. It looks like a regular, but there's no cord, and I plug it into the cordless jack box to select the wire. What that does is switch the wire from its calling sounder to this much more sensitive relay, which is driving the local sounder. And it also puts the key in the circuit so I can break the circuit and interrupt, and get the attention of the guy on the other side. Except in this case, the guy on the other side is a computer and he's not paying attention. The 2 wires we're connected to right now, one is news headlines. I think it's the Reuters news headlines at 20 words a minute. And the other is actual movement of trains right now out in Kansas on the old Middle Division of the Santa Fe. There's a lot of digital magic going on behind the scenes to get that. When railroads were built in this country, they were built with a single track because it was cheap, but you have the problem of opposing trains, plus you have fast trains and slow trains. So you needed some way to run that railroad. Well, originally they came up with a schedule. And the schedule said where all these meets and passes was supposed to take place. However, you all know what happens to schedules. Okay, so a system in the 1850s called timetable train order was developed. Now, there was a telegraph operator in every little railroad station along the way, and every time a train would pass, he would send in to a central office a telegraph report called an OS report. To this day, no one knows what OS means. It could mean on station, out of station, on sheet. There were several possibilities. They don't know where the actual origination of it. And actually what you're hearing is simulated OS reports. You see the operator at the station send in his, hey, I've got an OS for you. Dispatcher replies, GA, go ahead. Then you get the OS itself, and then the dispatcher replies, okay, got it, okay. Now what the dispatcher did is he had a very large sheet of paper. Today you'd recognize it as a spreadsheet. They were called a train sheet. I actually dealt with some of these, and I worked in the railroad industry in the 1970s. And they were physically very large sheets of paper. They might be about that tall, and you'd have to pan them up and down the desk. But every column represented a train, and every row a station. So when the dispatcher got that OS report, he'd find that train, that station right in the time. He now knows what is and is not working on his railroad. He can then change those meet and pass locations by sending out train orders to the stations ahead of the trains, because there was no direct communication with the trains. And then the operator had to deliver those orders to the trains. And that's how railroads were run. And believe it or not, that didn't really end until the 1980s. And in fact, the last use of telegraph on the railroads was in the early 1980s. There were still a few remote places where that was the only communication on a branch line. We know the last train order we've been able to document was in 1982. I know, again, having worked in the industry, that there were still working wires up in certain places up till about 1990. I know there was one between Spokane, Washington, and Pasco, because one of the technicians happened to be one of my customers. Now, another thing you might not know about Telegraph is it was the first job that accepted women in an office environment. Long before there were women secretaries or women telegraph operators. The job came out of nowhere. There was no preconceived notions of who could do it. And there was an overnight demand. Morse had a lot of trouble convincing anyone that, why would we want to do this? But within a couple of years, if you were in business and you wanted to stay in business and your competitors were using the telegraph, you had better use the telegraph. It was really the beginning of globalization. It's said that the railroads were the arteries of the Industrial Revolution and the telegraph was the nervous system. Up through the Civil War, there was a shortage of telegraph operators, which is why anybody that could do the job. It was a job that a lot of immigrants, you could come into this country as a poor immigrant, and if you had the wherewithal, because you don't learn this quickly, to do it, you could have a reasonably well-paying career. You weren't going to get rich. One well-known immigrant boy was Andrew Carnegie. Okay, he got a job delivering telegrams, learned the code while waiting for the next message to deliver. And Andy was kind of a climber. He rapidly rose through the ranks. By 1859, he was superintendent of the Pittsburgh Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad. He was also the one asked to form the U.S. military telegraph at the beginning of the Civil War. He tasked 4 of his operators to start it. One was a Richard O'Brien. Now, Richard had a younger brother who he had taught to be a telegraph operator. And the younger brother, J. Emmett O'Brien, started work as an operator, paid for the Pennsylvania Railroad at age 10. Wow. Emmett also joined the Civil War effort at age 13, becoming the youngest operator in the U.S. military telegraph. And if you want a fascinating book to read, look up Telegraphing in Battle. It's Emmett's autobiography, as well as he used a lot of material from his brother's diaries. It's a fascinating story of one young man's first great adventure. You might enjoy it. Andy also taught a niece, or a cousin, I'm not sure which, a woman, to be a telegraph operator, set her up as a freight agent in Pittsburgh, and ran her as a school for young women. Why? Well, they tended to show up for work on time, unlike the men. They weren't drunk when they showed up, unlike the men. They didn't swear at the customers, unlike the men. And, good frugal Scotsman that Andy was, he could get away with paying them less. When the telegraph operators, like a lot of laborers, started to try to unionize in the 1870s, one of their issues was equal work for equal pay for men and women. And it wasn't because the men, who were in the vast majority, wanted to be nice to the women. They didn't want to lose their jobs to lower paid women. And although there were some men that argued that women weren't as good as men, it was clear to anyone with half a brain that they were just as good. And now, in Victorian times, that a woman could chat with a man, sight unseen, unapproved by a father or brother, was considered dangerous and romantic. A whole genre of telegraph fiction, romance fiction, was written because the general public was just fascinated by this concept. It was the first chat room, for lack of a better word. 2 titles I know of are Wooing by Wire, and the other is Wired Love. One of them was written by a young woman operator in Toronto. Her name was Josie Schofield. And Josie was very outspoken in the telegraph press at the time that women should go out and make their own way in the world, instead of, as she said, sitting at home with folded hands, waiting for the coming man, who is often so long in coming, and worth so little when he arrives. If you're interested in women telegraphers, there is a book, which for reasons I don't understand is free to download because it wasn't published all that long ago, called My Sister's Telegraphic. If you just Google My Sister's Telegraphic, you will find, PDF, you will find where you can download the book. It's fascinating. Look at a piece of history that people just don't know. That and O'Brien's book, Telegraphing in Battle, are just fascinating reads.
That's very neat. What's your name and call
My
sign?
name is Chris, Chris Hausler, Hausler. I am the International Vice President of the Morse Telegraph Club. We've been around since 1942. We are now a 501c3. We publish a quarterly magazine, and this is the summer edition, hot off the presses. Please feel free to take one. I have cleverly stapled in the back a membership application, again $20, and it also tells you a little more what we do. We not only do museum displays, we give talks, we actually consult with movie directors. We were on the set of Spielberg's Lincoln movie that came out a few years ago, putting their telegraph operation. Our goal is that telegraph be correctly represented because it frequently so poorly is.
And your ham call is?
WB2TLL. Tough luck lover. But I'm not that active in ham radio. I use this code. This is American Morse.
Yeah, American.
This is the code with dots and dashes, a long dash, a longer dash, and spaced characters. It's about 20% faster at a given rate.
Okay.
And I think it has more. I'm not sure why everything stopped.
I was going to ask you to tell us what they're sending there.
Okay. Well, let me actually, for a moment, I will, as I said, this program is bidirectional. I will actually disconnect from this broadcast wire, and I'll just send something. I'm going to, now, the other thing is, you do this all day. What do you get?
Carpal tunnel
Syndrome, yes, but back then it was called glass arm or telegrapher's paralysis. So in 1904 or 5, a man named Horace Martin came up with a better idea called the vibroplex. And this is a very early vibroplex. It was made in 1907 or 1908 because that was the only year they were in Norcross, Georgia, and that's what the label says. So I'll just send the quick brown fox. And if you look over here, you can see the quick brown fox showed up on the screen.
Yeah.
And that included some spaced characters. There was no long dashes in it, but I think it's a more musical code because of the additional timing elements. It has more of a rhythm pattern to it. In fact, one of our members is a New Zealander who was a landline telegraph operator using international Morse in New Zealand. And he has learned American Morse, and he's also a musician and thinks it's much more musical. And I have to agree with him.
Okay, this is very interesting, and thanks for all your time. And
Glad
this will be up on YouTube here.
Okay.
Wow, so thank you much.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you.